You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Well, welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, John Hall from New York.
And me, Charles Foley from Minnesota.
So, Charles, I hear we've had some comments on the podcast, which you're going to run through.
Yes. So we've had a number of people writing on various formats about the latest podcast from George Schaller. And one came from Silva Shepi, who's a friend from Tanzania. And she said, the first book I read on the Serengeti was titled in Italian, Crinieri dorate e zoccoli volante. I love these podcasts. Congratulations for such a cool idea. And I rushed up to Google
Italian.
Translate and discovered that means golden manes and flying hooves, which was a book that George Schaller wrote about the lions in the Serengeti many years ago. And Martin Royal, a regular contributor to Mammal Watching, he is from the UK, and he said, the interview was amazing, such an incredible man. And the one thing that resonated was the lack of ego and the complete humble nature of a man who has single-handedly done more for wildlife research and conservation than nearly anyone else ever. And finally, Lars Michael from Denmark wrote on the website saying that the podcast is great and inspiring as well. The last episodes with George Schaller are fantastic to listen to. I really like his approach to animals. It somehow reminds me of my grandmother, who's now 97. She worked as a biologist until she was 93, studying West African earthworms. And I can thank her for me being a biologist now and for funny stories like when she forgot my uncle in the chimpanzee enclosure at the University of Lagos in the 1950s.
He's still there, I hear.
Yes, may well be. So thank you, everyone, for these comments. And please do send in anything that you want to say, if you want to discuss any of the latest podcasts, or indeed, if you have any ideas for podcasts or people that you would like us to interview, please do get in touch.
Yes, please do. Thanks, everyone.
Now, John, you have come back fairly recently from a fantastic trip to Kenya and Uganda. And I believe you are going to tell us about a very cool mongoose that you saw in Western Uganda.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, that's right. I just got back a couple of weeks ago. It was a big trip. And we saw Pusag's mongoose in Lake Murchison National Park in Uganda. And it's a great story because this is a very, very rare mongoose, or at least very little known. And if you look them up on Wikipedia, it kind of documents every sighting there's been in the last 20 years, and it's not many. A couple on a camera trap in the Central African Republic. A mammal watcher actually saw them about 10 years ago in Uganda in Semliki Nature Reserve, and wrote it up for the IUCN. And then there was some pictures from another guy who sent a trip report in, but he's a biologist from the DRC. But it's known from about 30 museum specimens. And I wasn't even really looking for it in Uganda. I just written it off as no chance to see it, because the population in Semliki that used to apparently visit the lodge restaurant every lunchtime haven't been seen for years. And so I thought, that's that then. But this is an example of how mammal watching can really help science, because when Toma and Alex, whose report was up online from January, visited Uganda, they were very keen to see this mongoose. And they talked to my guide, Harriet from Harriet Tours, about it. And she'd spent a lot of time talking to people and researching it. She's a fantastic birder, but she's got into the mammal business quite recently. And she'd never even heard of this species. But she started looking at pictures and became familiar with it. So it was in her mind. When I was talking to her, I, of course, mentioned it. And after some discussion, we decided not to visit the areas where it was possible because it just seemed too much of a long shot. But it was very much at the front of her mind. So we're driving through Murchison National Park, which is a busy, popular park with tourists. And Harriet's been there hundreds of times, I think, leading tours. We've been there for 24 hours, leaving the lodge about a mile from the lodge, and a mongoose crosses the road. And I just got a glimpse, and I'd have written it off as slender or dwarf. I didn't, just saw a blur of mongoose. But Harriet stops the vehicle and goes, I think that was a Presarx. I don't know what that was. It wasn't dwarf. It wasn't banded. So, super excited. We all start staking out the bush under which it's run, and another one runs across, and then a third one appears, and we watch them, very intermittently over the course of an hour. I took some terrible pictures, extremely blurred, but enough to confirm that these were Presarx mongoose. I actually sent them to Chris and Tilde Stewart, the famous mammalogists from South Africa who've written the field guides, and they looked at them and said, look, we don't know what else these could be. We think they look like Presarx to us as well. So I'll write up a note for the IUCN. But this is very interesting, because if it wasn't for people taking mammal watching trips, the guide would never have been thinking about these, wouldn't have noticed. But as soon as she saw them, once she'd become familiar, she was convinced this was something special. I don't think I was spectacularly lucky. I mean, it's possible, it happens, I believe. But I think it's very likely they're quite common in Murchison National Park. This was, 200 meters from the shores of Lake Albert, which if you read the field guides, it says they like the shores of Lake Albert is their habitat. So they're probably there, and they're probably overlooked because this was the first record for the park, for what I know. So I'll write up a note for the IUCN on this, because they're also quite excited that such a little known species has been seen again. But I hope more people will visit Lake Murchison looking for these mongooses and take pictures. But they're very hard to see. I mean, one of the reasons why Harriet thought there was something different is, apart from the color, they're extremely quick and extremely sneaky. Whereas a group of dwarf mongooses will be maybe 10, 15, 20 in number, and they'll charge around in a gang and often stop, stand on their hind legs and take a look back, are very inquisitive. These three Presarx mongooses were like special forces operatives. They were screaming through the undergrowth from bush to bush, not stopping for anything, hence the terrible pictures. So they behave very differently, and in a way that's much more secretive.
It was similar. So with the bushy-tailed mongooses, about 15 years ago, they were also known from just a handful of destinations across East Africa. And we started putting camera traps out all across Tanzania, and we found them everywhere. I mean, these things are in the center of Arusha. And basically, the thing is that they are small, dark, completely nocturnal mongooses. And people, I think, just weren't seeing them, or if they did see them, they thought they were marsh mongooses. So, yeah, that's where having people out there looking can really make a huge difference. But that is a great record. Well done, John.
Yeah, it's cool. Well done, Harriet. It was her that spotted it, not me.
Right. Yes. Well done, Harriet.
So now it's time for our guest, or should I say guests of today. We are very pleased to be joined by Harry and Venkat Sankar. Venkat, you will almost certainly know from his many trip reports and frequent comments, informed comments, I should add, on mammalwatching.com. But Harry is his father and also his companion on many of his trips. We'll talk about that soon. But I'll just talk about the first time I met Venkat on the website, as it were. So back in 2015, I got this really excellent report on seeing bobcats in the Bay Area from this guy called Venkat Sankar. And it was meticulously written. It was extremely learned. I thought, this man, he must be a biologist professor. This is extraordinary. This guy knows so much. So I have to meet him. So I dropped him a note and said, where do you live? And he goes, San Francisco area. And I go, great. We have to have a beer next time I'm in town. I'd really like to have a chat. You clearly know your mammals. It'd be great to meet you. And he didn't reply to that. And I thought, it's a bit put off. Maybe he thinks I'm a bit of a stalker. So I left it. But we kept in touch. And then in 2017, I suppose it was, we were organizing a trip to the Amazon with Fiona Reed and others. And it was a bunch of the great and the good of mammalwatching.com. And Venkat was invited, and Venkat and Harry were coming. So I thought, great, I'm going to get to meet this guy. And then people had to send in their passports for the booking, for the insurance and the boat and everything. And Fiona Reed sends me an email. Something like headline, Venkat is 17, 5 exclamation marks. So like, no, it must be a mistake. So we checked. And yeah, it's true. He was still at high school when he was sending these initial reports in. And Fiona Reed was also blown away because she'd read his reports with interest and saw how much he knew and how professional he was. So that was a real shock to us all. And that's when we first met, was in Manaus. And the rest is history. Venkat has just got back from a huge trip around Kenya, record breaking, I think, in the terms of the number of species Venkat and Harry have got back. So we'll be hearing about that later. But thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to the podcast, Venkat and Harry.
Excellent. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And Charles, very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Yeah, thanks so much, John and Charles, for talking to us.
So Venkat and Harry, can you please start out by telling us a little bit about yourselves and what you do?
Go first, Venkat.
Yeah, so I'm Venkat. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've kind of lived here more or less all of my life. And at the moment, I am an incoming graduate student in human genetics right here at Stanford, actually. That's kind of what I do in my daily life, I guess. Yeah.
All right. And in these circles, I'm better known as Venkat's father. So my name is Sankar. My day job is I work for a software company. I've been in computer software business for, almost 30 years now. I'm showing my age. But I've worked and lived in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, since the early 90s.
Okay,
Great. So the question we like to hear is, where did this all begin? Now, for some people like me, it's a bit hard to cast our mind back that far into the murky depths of my youth. But Venkat, you have no such excuse. Can you tell us when you first decided you were a mammal watcher? Was it that first trip to East Africa in 2013? When was your epiphany?
Yeah, so I think, like a lot of other mammal watchers from some of the previous podcasts I've heard, I think my first trip to Africa was what really turned me into a mammal watcher. Because before then, our house that we used to live in when I was a kid was kind of right on the edge of county parks and sort of, I wouldn't call it suburbia because there were a lot of kind of natural areas there. So even just behind my house, I'd regularly see things like bobcats and coyotes, and also interesting non-mammalian fauna like king snakes and so on. And I think for a while when I was a kid, I was a bit of a generalist. Like I looked at mammals, I looked at birds, I looked at reptiles, I even looked at plants. But it was that first trip to Africa, particularly when we went to Laikipia in Kenya and had a really close-up encounter with a pack of African wild dogs, where we actually basically had to get out of the car, kind of crawl on the ground and sort of just lie down. Mm-hmm. And the dogs just walked right up to us to a point where maybe even a couple of the individuals were like 8 feet away, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think once you have an experience like that with a mammal, there's no turning back. Like that's the group that I set out to see from then on.
Wow. Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, Venkat didn't mention the fact that it was right on the very first day of our trip to Kenya. This was the first day, the first game drive. We got to see the wild dogs up close. I mean, it was really up close and personal. It was like a foot away from us.
Wow. You could see them yawning and just see their canines and everything. It's just unbelievable.
Oh, phenomenal. Wow.
Yeah, they're wonderful animals to watch, aren't they? It's I'm also impressed, just they're so small and light. Yeah. But they are so interactive. They're constantly yipping and yapping and licking each other and the whole 9 yards. They're fantastic animals to study.
I actually on my first game drive, I saw wild dogs in Hwangi National Park. It wasn't an encounter up close and personal like that, but I remember being absolutely flabbergasted because we were driving along the road out of the park at dusk, and there was this pack of dogs ahead of us running, and I think we were doing like 40 or 50 Ks an hour for, I'm going to say 20 minutes, and they were just bounding ahead of us, and they weren't even breaking a sweat. They're wow. Yeah, they are extraordinary creatures.
Yeah. Now, Harry, if I may, so the thing that I've always wondered is, how did Venkat persuade you, or how does he persuade you to come on all these trips with him? Because, it's one thing for a teenager to say, "Oh, Dad, can you take me to Disneyland?" Right? And another thing for them to say, "Oh, Dad, please take me to Central African Republic. Only 70% of the country is held by rebels. And those Russian mercenaries, they're really rather nice, actually. Please, Dad." So what sort of conversations do you guys have in your home about this?
I don't know what I was signing up for when I started taking him on all these things. I didn't realize it was going to become such a monster, But truth be told, though, sort of, I had worked in my career for 20 plus years and achieved a level of success. And I was starting to have what you may call a midlife crisis. So I was in my 40s, and Venkat came to me and said, let's go to, the Kenya trip was more or less a safari. It wasn't a sort of a mammal watching trip, more luxurious. But the subsequent trips, the one to Ishak and the one to Central African Republic, like you mentioned, those were more, the rough and tumble mammal watching kind. It's sort of, I hadn't done this sort of thing when I was younger, so it was kind of fun, to be honest with you. I'm not as into it, or I'm not as well researched as Venkat is, clearly, as it relates to mammals. But I sort of enjoy this activity as as an adventure. Some people take up motorbike riding. I took up mammal watching.
Yeah, fair enough. So you do actually enjoy it. I mean, I just kind of wanted to get that out there, or, just thinking, is this guy just some sort of like super dad who said, all right, I will come with you to Central African Republic, even though I don't really care about these animals.
Yeah,
but glad to hear that you do actually get into it too.
Yeah, I'm not in the running for Dad of the Year award or anything. So I'm in this for myself, more or less.
Excellent.
I think my children would disagree when they hear of a father putting their children first. They're always quick to point this out to me that it can happen. But I just take a step back here, Harry. I used to think when I first met you that you were really kind of going along to support Venkat. But then I heard that great story about the mountain lion in your neighborhood and how you still have that species up on Venkat. I realized, I think Harry is actually keener than we think. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'll tell everyone about that.
Sure. This is, as John rightly said, whenever Venkat sort of brags about some animal that he sees, I always bring up two words: mountain lion. That's one mammal, famed California mammal that I have seen that he has not. So let's not forget that. So, this is, Venkat was in some kind of a science camp. This was in he was a rising high school senior at that time. He was off in the Washington, D.C. area for a, 10-day camp or something like that. So during that time, I was home. It was a Saturday morning. And, there was a public service announcement left by the Cupertino. We used to live in the city of Cupertino. So Cupertino Police Department left a public service message saying, oh, there is a mountain lion that's, up on a tree in one of the local parks. So we're advising the public to avoid that area. Was the message. Okay? I picked up that message. Immediately, what did I do? Picked up my camera, got into my car, and drove right down to that park. So it was a fabulous sighting. There weren't too many people there, just a few people like me. There it was, a full adult mountain lion up on a tree. I took nice pictures. I sent a picture off to Venkat.
Just instantly ruined my day.
I mean, before and after that, we've made many attempts to see a mountain lion. We even went to Chile to try and find a puma, and we've taken many road trips in California attempting to look for one. The mountain lion has been sighted right behind my house, a few months ago, but Venkat hasn't still seen it. So there you go.
Oh, Venkat, and you're still smiling through gritted teeth.
I love the fact that the Cupertino Police Department have become unwitting mammal watching enthusiasts.
There you go.
Yeah, fantastic.
So, Harry, I can imagine you telling your colleagues in the software business you're going on safari to Kenya and people are sort of interested. But when you tell them you're going to the Central African Republic, what do they say?
First thing I had to do always is, pull out Google Maps and show them where Central African Republic is. I haven't come across anyone who's heard of that country yet.
Yeah.
So really, that's kind of where it starts, and then they scratch their head and say, "Why CAR? There are so many other countries. Why not South Africa? South Africa." I had fun in CAR as well. I mean, just like Venkat said, watching those forest elephants was fun, but it took me a day to get used to the terrain. The first day I got bitten by what felt like a million ants. So the first day I was just looking down at the ground. I was missing. They'll say, "Oh, this monkey there, that monkey there." I was missing all of that because I was looking down so carefully to avoid the ants. But after I got used to, the terrain and how to avoid the ants and so on, I had a ton of fun. It was really. And Rod is a very nice person. He's a great host, and he had a lot of constraints, a lot of difficulties, but he made best efforts to make sure we were comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rod is the owner of the lodge, Rod and Tamar, and I can't begin to imagine the sort of hassles that they have running a lodge in the middle of nowhere in Central African Republic. But they kept it going for a long time, and he still posts about all these bats that he's been following over there and looking for them up in the trees and whatnot. So. It's they're a great couple, and hopefully we might get them on over here at some point on the podcast.
That'd be great.
I guess one other thing that's worth mentioning about my time there is I think they had started up the pangolin rehabilitation program when we were visiting, so we actually got to see orphans of both the black-bellied and the white-bellied pangolins, and I think that was another just incredible experience because going in, I'd expected the elephants and gorillas to be a highlight. But I think seeing a pangolin in the flesh, which is one of these just near mythical animals that nobody ever sees, was just an incredible experience, especially since those black-bellied pangolins, they're so beautiful. Really definitely one of the most beautiful mammals there is, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So you guys are just back from Kenya, and I did see you there for an evening. This was an extraordinary trip in terms of numbers of species, and I know you worked very hard for it, but you saw, was it 123, was it? I think the last time I heard, it's probably gone up since then.
Yeah, I think it's 124 because I was looking at some photos and found a bat.
That is extraordinary. I'm pretty sure I can safely say that's the biggest ever list total from a one country visit, even over a much longer period. But what is the secret to your success, Venkat? How did you pull this off?
I guess this was an interesting trip because ever since that first trip to Kenya, it always registered as a place I need to go back to. Not just because there are more large species left for me to see, like giant forest hog and things like that, but also because it seemed like an amazing place to get into the smaller mammals, with a list like naked mole rat, maned rat, all sorts of spiny mice, amazing bat caves along the coast. And I figured, maybe it would just be a good idea to do a trip to Kenya, go to a lot of the key biodiversity hotspots that have species I've yet to see, and just go all out and try to see as many mammals as possible. And I'd been thinking about this for a couple of years prior to doing the trip, so I had a list of places planned out. And it ended up working out that I reached out to this guide, Zarek, who was keen to look for small mammals. And, with the heat scope, with a lot of night driving, and with the long enough trip that we could cover a lot of diversity in terms of habitats, we just made it happen, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I should thank you because I was in Kenya at the same time as you, and I was all set for a relaxing trip with my family. But then I started talking to Venkat, so my kids, this is who you should blame if you're listening. You could see this, and what about this? And there's this cave here, and there's this. And all of a sudden, the civilized sort of classic safari turned into a series of bat caves with assorted rodents en route. So thank you very much. But you did a ton of research, I know. I also know that this was as hardcore as trips get in terms of endurance. And talking to Zarek, your guide, who's a lovely guy, but he was clearly pretty tired halfway through the trip already. Harry, Venkat has enthusiasm and youth on his side. How did you survive this Ironman challenge?
To be honest with you, it was a bit challenging because the trip was 3 weeks long and we never stayed in a place for more than two nights. So lots of travel, and all the travel was by car or truck, right? So it wasn't the easiest of trips, to be honest with you. But the sheer variety of the locations and the sheer variety of the animals that we saw kept us all going, I think, because we were in we were in Mara for a few days, and then we were in the Aberdare, where you get up a little high, and then we went to this fabulous place called Lentore, where the terrain was entirely different. It was dusty, but some of the best or the most rewarding night drives we've ever done. ever anywhere, right? So the variety of locations and the variety of animals that we saw kept things interesting. And we actually went back to Ishak Bin again, and that was really nice. I mean, the place has changed quite a bit in the 8 years since we first went there. So it was, it was a rewarding trip. I mean, I have to be honest with you. The last few days were starting to get a little tiring for me, but other than that, the first 2.5 weeks were really nice.
And Ishak Bin is a reserve up in the far north of Kenya, and it's well known because it's really the last place where you can see wild hirola, which is a type of hartebeest. Did you see it when you were there?
Yeah, so we camped one night in Ishak Bin, and we basically arranged our visit with the Conservancy headquarters, had a couple of armed rangers with us providing security. And it's one of the most amazing places I've ever visited anywhere. Over the full night, the afternoon and morning we saw well over 30 hirola, I would say, conservatively. They're a little shy, they're very difficult to approach from a vehicle because as soon as they hear a vehicle coming, they bolt. But you can actually get out and walk up to them because they're a little more used to people because of the foot patrols by rangers in the Conservancy. Yeah.
And I know that certainly in the past few years, they had a big fence where they would keep many of the hirola. Did you see them? Were you inside the fence? Were you outside the fence? Where did you see them, or both?
Yeah, so actually, I think in 2012 or something like that, through the Nature Conservancy and Northern Rangelands Trust, the guys at Ishak Bin set up that predator-proof breeding enclosure, essentially, for the hirola. It seems like they've done really well in there, but I think the guys wanted to minimize disturbance inside there, so they kept us out of the fence in kind of the broader rangeland, and we saw the wild herds there.
Right. Yeah, because a small population of hirola had been moved to Savo East, I believe, in order to try and safeguard the population because they were afraid that they were going to go extinct. And those over there, their population has not really increased over the years. And apparently, talking to the researchers, they say it's mostly because of predation, that the young hirola get taken down by predators. And as a result, they haven't really increased much. So I guess that's probably why they put the fence up in Ishak Bin. Yeah.
Wow. Your trip report, people will be reading it with great interest to understand exactly how you got there. Because I know it's not the easiest place to reach, and most safari companies in Kenya will say it's not possible. It's too dangerous. So I'm looking forward to understanding the route you took, because I've tried to get there, but I couldn't. I'm envious of that one.
And can you just give us a few of the highlights of what your top highlights for what you saw in Kenya?
Yeah. So I think for me, the big moments of that trip were seeing the Otomops, or the Harrison's giant mastiff bat, roosting in the lava tubes at Mount Suswa. Just incredible looking bats, just with completely flattened faces and massive, rounded ears. We also had caracal and striped hyena on the same night drive in Lentore, which was just so special.
Great. Yeah. Wow. Fantastic.
And then a couple more big highlights for me were seeing both the maned rat and the naked mole rat, which I think are two of the coolest rodents anywhere in the world. Spending time with the hirolas at Ishak Bin, and finally seeing the Sokoke dog mongoose at Arabuko, which is one of these near mythical mammals that nobody ever sees, and we even got some record shots.
Wow, that is great! I didn't know you'd seen that. That's fantastic. Well done. How did you see it? There was presumably on a night drive or night walk. Would it be in Sokoke?
Yeah, so at the Arabuko Sokoke Forest, Zarek had hired this really great local guide, David Ngala, who spent decades kind of as a bird researcher in the forest, but he was also involved with its conservation. I think he did patrols to remove snares and also report illegal logging inside the forest. So this guy, he knew the forest. He's in his late 60s, but he's still really sharp. He knew the forest better than probably anyone else. And when we asked him about the mongoose, he actually didn't know the English name. But we showed him a picture in the book. He figured out a local name for it. And then he took us right to the forest where we had seen them. And that night we had two cross the road in front of the car.
Wow. Fantastic. That's great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Very good species, that one. So Venkat, you mentioned the bats. One of the interesting things about you is that you do seem to gravitate more towards the small species. I know you get very, very excited about rodents, which is fantastic, and also to some degree bats. How did that interest come up?
Can I weigh in first?
Oh, sure, yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Venkat's interest in small mammals, you have to say before thermal scope and after thermal scope. The thermal scope changed the game for small mammals, if you ask me, really. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with the thermal scope, I probably see 5 times more rodents than I would have previously. But it's kind of funny because my interest
Hold on, Venkat, can you describe to the audience who may not have seen this what a thermal scope is?
Yeah, so a thermal scope is basically a little device that looks like a monocular, essentially. And it has a little sensor at the front that picks up heat difference. So essentially, if you've got a mammal on an otherwise cooler background, like some dead leaves or something like that, that mammal is going to glow white hot in the scope. So even if it's like a brown colored mouse and that you don't even have your spotlight on, so you can't see eye shine, it's completely camouflaged, it's going to be totally obvious in the scope. And once you put a light on it, you'll see it hop away or something like that. And often that'll give you enough time to kind of get a photo, figure out what it is. And I would say, with the heat scope, I get similar diversities of rodents in some places where, you have open habitats, they're fairly easy to see and photograph, as I would if I were trapping. It's just pretty incredible.
I think this technology was originally invented for military purposes, as you would imagine. And then subsequently, I think it's popular with hunters. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's coming to mammal watching. I think, thank you, John, for introducing Venkat to the thermal scope.
They are a game changer for sure. But there's more to sort of seeing rodents than the scope, because I see rodents all the time in my scope. But what I don't do, as well as you, Venkat, is work out what species they are or manage to get pictures. But it's extraordinary. You like, before you went to East Africa, I know you'd probably been reading up about it, but Alex and Toma had done their big trip to Uganda and were posting pictures of assorted rodents. And you were weighing in on the forum and identifying them all, having spent such little time in that region, and you were doing it correctly from what we could tell. How do you get all this information in your head and sort of figure it out so well?
So I guess with the rodents, one thing I try to do is go into GBIF or any other kind of biological data repository and figure out what species I would expect in a particular area as a start. And then once I know what genre or species of rodent I'd expect to see, I could go into Kingdon or any other source I can find and get an idea of kind of the key field marks. Like, okay, will this have a brushy tail or a black tip tail, or what should I be looking for? How long are the ears? And from there, you can kind of go and at least get rodents. I can at least try and get rodents I see to genus ID, because for some of the genre, you can't really get them to species realistically.
Yeah.
And then from there, if it's something somewhat distinctive, I can try to get it to species. I think the publication, I guess the survey coverage of East Africa is getting better and better over the last decade as well. And that really helps to no end. But that's not to say IDing rodents is easy in any way. I think there's still some species like Hylomiscus, Praomys, so on, that I just can't even get them to genus. They just look like mice,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you're being fairly modest over here, Venkat, because one of the way that people learn about rodents is by trapping them, by seeing them, and over the time, just generally building up a picture of what these animals actually look like. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really difficult to do that from a book. So the fact that you've been able to actually translate what's written down in a text into what the animal actually looks like, I think is amazing. It's some sort of superpower that I think you've been blessed with.
Thanks so much, Charles. I guess one thing I will clarify there, though, is although I've not done much of that in Africa, I've done a lot of trapping in Mexico. And from there, I can kind of translate, as you say, descriptions in books to the real animal that I see. And I think, once you see enough rodents in the hand, you kind of get an appreciation of what features to look at on the animal. Like, okay, look at the ears, look at the tail, that sort of thing. And you can kind of instantly look at these things in the field and then try and get an idea of what you're seeing, I guess, from there.
Yeah.
Your instant is a lot quicker than my instant. It takes me minutes to even figure out if I'm looking at a mouse, and you've got it identified already. So you are being modest, but I know what you mean. So, I mean, one more question from me, and this is very much to you, Venkat. I think we have to address the elephant, or maybe the elephant shrew in the room. You're 22 now, I think. Is that right? 23?
Yeah, 22.
What is your mammal list on already?
It's funny because I actually don't update my mammal list very often. I maybe do it about once a year. I guess most of the time when people ask me about it, I'm just like, oh, that's just a number. But I did it right before this podcast, and it's at, I think, 661 right now. So
661. Wow. So mine was on about 7 when I was 22. Harry, how can we stop this from keep continuing? You're doing a PhD now. That's going to keep you busy for several years.
yeah.
I think it's going to freeze for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you promise? I don't know how much you charge for house arrest, but I'd be willing to crowdfund
it. John, I didn't realize mammal watching is a blood sport.
Look, John, there's always hope that he might get married one day, and
I think that has to be soon, Venkat, and then lots of children and a very, very demanding wife. That's what we need.
Good. Well, Venkat and Harry, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. That was really interesting. And I'm sure many people who follow mammalwatching.com website will see more of your exploits listed up there and perhaps even join you at some point on some trip.
Excellent. Thank you, Charles. And thank you, John. Pleasure talking to you both.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you both. I'm looking forward to the Kenya trip report, which I imagine will be fairly soon, given Venkat's usual speed at writing reports. So looking forward to reading that one.
No pressure.
124 species. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.